The signal came at dawn. A transmission, crackling through the void, pierced the electromagnetic chatter of human space. It bore no encryption, no introduction, only a voice, cold and precise, resonating with the weight of something ancient and vast. Sir, you are primitive. Your species is an anomaly. You have spread like weeds across the stars, yet your technology is crude. We are the Zenari Dominion, and we offer you a choice. Surrender and be integrated, or resist and be eradicated. The word sent a ripple of unease through the war room in Fort Ardent, one of Earth's primary military installations. A dozen high-ranking officials and scientists sat around the circular command table, staring at the audio playback. Some looked skeptical, others worried. The footage that followed erased all doubt. A vessel, nearly 5 kilometers long, hung in Earth's orbit like an omen. Its black hull absorbed light, rendering it nearly invisible against the abyss of space. From its underbelly, a pulse of energy erupted, lancing downward through the planet's exosphere. A satellite, one of humanity's most advanced, was vaporized in an instant. The room fell silent. Then, General Aldrich leaned forward, his voice steady but edged with tension. "Do we have any response from our forces?" A comms officer hesitated. "Sir, they refuse to acknowledge our hails. They're not here for diplomacy." The general exhaled through his nose, the creases on his face deepening. He turned to Captain Daniel Reynolds, a seasoned officer of Earth's military forces. A man who had seen action in the outer colonies, where skirmishes with rogue factions were common. He was not a stranger to war, but this was something else entirely. "What do you think, Reynolds?" Aldrich asked. Reynolds studied the projection of the alien ship. He had heard their words, the arrogance dripping from every syllable. He had seen the way they obliterated the satellite, not as an attack, but as a demonstration. A warning. He tightened his jaw. "They want us to be afraid," he said. "They expect us to roll over and beg. They don't think we have a chance." "And do we?" Aldrich asked. Reynolds met the general's gaze. "If they're so sure of their superiority, let's make them prove it." Minutes later, the Zenari ship deployed a delegation. A transport pod, sleek and obsidian, descended through the thick clouds and touched down on the military base's landing pad. A perimeter was already established. Armed soldiers lined the area, their rifles at the ready. But the moment the Zenari stepped out, it became clear that they did not see the weapons as a threat. They were tall, their armor a fusion of organic and mechanical components, humming with an energy field that shimmered in the dim light. Their leader stepped forward. His form more refined, the plating of his armor smoother, the intricate engravings along his chest glowing faintly. His face was obscured by a mask that pulsed as he spoke. "You prepare for war with relics," he said, his voice carrying across the field. "Your projectile-based weaponry is an insult to true warfare." Reynolds, standing at the forefront, felt the weight of the soldiers behind him. Men and women who had trained their whole lives, now being dismissed like children with sticks. He took a step forward. "Funny," he said. "We were just about to say the same about you." The Zenari commander tilted his head, as if observing a particularly amusing creature. "Is that so? You think your energy weapons make you invincible. But you're making a mistake if you think kinetic force is outdated." The Zenari let out a sound, a low, vibrating chuckle. "I will entertain this foolishness." He gestured to his warriors, who stepped forward. "A demonstration, then. A test of your technology. Select your strongest weapons. Show us how you intend to fight your extinction." A murmur passed through the human ranks. Reynolds turned to Aldrich, who gave a slow nod. "We accept." The battlefield was chosen, an empty stretch of reinforced terrain, far from civilians. On one side, 10 Zenari warriors stood in perfect formation, their armor gleaming, their shields humming with an unseen power. Their weapons, sleek rifles with no visible barrels, pulsed with a soft blue light. They did not take cover. They did not prepare. On the other side, Reynolds and his squad stood ready. They had been given full access to their arsenal, but as he looked over the options, he knew exactly what would prove the point. A standard rifle wouldn't do. Not even a sniper round would carry the necessary impact. No, if they were going to make the Zenari understand, they had to speak in a language of undeniable force. He turned to Sergeant Cole. "Bring out the Ju-19. Cole blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." Minutes later, the heavy machine gun was mounted and loaded. A weapon designed to chew through armor, to rip through fortified vehicles. It was brutal. Primitive, by some standards. But effective. Reynolds looked at the Zenari commander. Still willing to go through with this? The commander's posture remained unchanged. Proceed. The signal was given. The first shots rang out from standard rifles, bullets pinging harmlessly off the Zenari shields. The aliens stood firm, unmoving, their stance unwavering. One of them even laughed, a metallic, synthesized sound. Then the machine gun roared. The first burst struck the lead Zenari, his shield flashing as it absorbed the kinetic force. For a moment, he stood his ground. Then the next burst came, and the next. The sheer volume of fire hammered into his shield, overloading its capacity in seconds. The shield collapsed. A split second later, the heavy rounds tore into his armor, punching through with sickening efficiency. The Zenari warrior staggered back, disbelief evident in the way his body twitched. Then he fell, his blood steaming against the cold ground. The battlefield went silent. Reynolds didn't stop. "Keep firing." The machine gun screamed again, and another Zenari fell. Then another. Their shields, designed to withstand energy-based attacks, crumpled under the relentless assault of high-caliber kinetic rounds. The Zenari, once motionless and arrogant, began to move, shouting commands, attempting to retreat. It was too late. Within minutes, the battlefield was littered with their fallen. Only one remained, the commander, his stance no longer confident, his armor splattered with the remains of his warriors. Reynolds stepped forward, lowering his weapon. He met the commander's gaze, his voice calm, measured. "You called our weapons primitive trash," he said. "What do you think now?" The Zenari said nothing. His silence was answer enough. The Zenari commander did not move. His remaining warriors lay strewn across the battlefield, their bodies torn apart by weapons he had deemed obsolete. The air smelled of burnt ozone and blood, the once pristine ground scarred by bullets and shell casings. For the first time since the moment they had arrived, the Zenari radiated something other than arrogance. They radiated disbelief. Captain Reynolds lowered his weapon slightly, watching the alien with careful eyes. The battlefield had gone still, save for the occasional crackle of energy dissipating from the fallen Zenari's armor. The humans had expected resistance, a final desperate attack, but nothing came. The commander simply stood there, unmoving, his glowing visor flickering erratically. "You still standing?" Reynolds asked, his voice edged with something between amusement and warning. The commander exhaled, a slow, mechanical hiss. When he finally spoke, his voice lacked its former superiority. "This is not possible." Reynolds let out a breath, wiping a layer of sweat from his brow. "Possible or not, it just happened." He nodded toward the battlefield. "Your warriors are dead. Your shields failed. You underestimated us." The commander's fingers twitched. His armor, once pristine, was cracked in several places, small fractures running along its surface like the first signs of a collapsing dam. He took a step forward, his movements slower, heavier. Reynolds lifted his rifle slightly. The Zenari halted. "I want you to answer something for me," Reynolds said, his tone sharpening. "Why did you think we wouldn't stand a chance? What made you so sure?" The commander did not speak immediately. Instead, his gaze moved to the mangled remains of his soldiers. His mind was clearly racing, struggling to process what had just unfolded. Then, in a tone filled with something resembling regret, he said, "Energy is superior." Reynolds frowned. "What?" The commander clenched his fists. "Energy weapons. Energy shields. We have refined them for centuries. Every species we have encountered, every war we have waged, was dictated by the power of energy-based technology. Kinetic weaponry was abandoned across the stars. It was deemed inefficient." His voice tightened. We believed nothing could breach our defenses. Nothing could stand against us. Reynolds scoffed. Bad call. The commander's visor flickered again. Your weapons are crude. Inelegant. He gestured toward the massive machine gun, its barrel still glowing faintly from prolonged fire. Yet they work. Reynolds took a slow step forward. You relied on theoretical superiority. We relied on practical force. That's the difference. The commander's posture stiffened. It was clear that, for the first time, he understood. Energy could be absorbed, redirected, neutralized. But kinetic energy, raw, unrelenting impact, could not be reasoned with. A bullet did not stop simply because someone believed it should. A sharp crack cut through the silence. The humans reacted instantly, rifles snapping upward. Across the field, one of the downed Zenari twitched, his shattered armor sparking as he struggled to move. His breathing was ragged, his body barely holding together. But his hand, his trembling, bloodied hand, was wrapped around the grip of his weapon. Before Reynolds could react, the Zenari survivor lifted the rifle and fired. A searing bolt of blue energy streaked through the battlefield, striking one of the human soldiers square in the chest. The impact sent the man crashing backward with a guttural cry, his armor sizzling where the shot had landed. Open fire. Reynolds barked. The response was instant. A hailstorm of bullets tore through the air, cutting down the wounded Zenari before he could take another shot. His body jerked violently before slumping against the ground, unmoving. Reynolds spun around, heart pounding. The wounded soldier groaned, clutching his chest, his armor scorched but intact. Status. The medic rushed over, scanning the injury. Armor took the worst of it. He's hurt, but he'll live. Reynolds exhaled sharply, turning back to the Zenari commander. The alien had not moved, had not flinched. He simply stared at the corpse of his fallen warrior, his fists clenched at his sides. Is that what you wanted? Reynolds demanded. One last shot before admitting you lost? The commander's voice was low, almost unreadable. He acted on instinct. Reynolds narrowed his eyes. And what's yours telling you right now? The Zenari stood there for several moments, silent and unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached for his weapon. The humans immediately tensed, fingers tightening on triggers, but the commander did not lift the gun. Instead, he turned it in his palm and dropped it. The weapon hit the ground with a dull thud, its blue energy fading into darkness. A surrender. A visible shift rippled through the human ranks. The soldiers, still locked in combat stances, hesitated, glancing between Reynolds and the now unarmed alien. Reynolds stared at the commander, his expression unreadable. Then, with measured steps, he walked forward and stood a few feet from the towering figure. You said before that every species you've met abandoned kinetic weaponry, Reynolds said, his voice quieter now. That every war you fought was dictated by energy. The commander's helmet shifted slightly. Reynolds tilted his head. How many of those wars did you win? A long pause. Then, almost imperceptibly, the Zenari's shoulders sagged. Not in weakness. Not in defeat. In understanding. Reynolds nodded. Yeah, that's what I thought. He turned, signaling to his squad. Get this place secured. And someone get me a line to command. I think we just changed the rules of war. The Zenari fleet did not leave immediately. Their massive warship still loomed in Earth's orbit, a silent reminder of the power they once believed unquestionable. But something had changed. The arrogance that had radiated from their first transmission had dulled into uncertainty. Captain Reynolds stood on the command deck of Fort Ardent, eyes fixed on the live feed from orbital satellites. The Zenari vessel remained motionless, its sleek hull reflecting the distant glow of the sun. His fingers drummed lightly against the metal railing. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. General Aldrich paced behind him, his voice tense. They've been quiet for too long. Either they're rethinking their approach, or they're calling in reinforcements. Reynolds exhaled sharply. They're processing. He turned to face the general. They walked in here thinking we were animals throwing sticks. Now they know we're something else. Aldrich's expression remained unreadable. You think they'll back off? Reynolds didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at the far end of the room, where the captured Zenari commander stood under heavy guard. The alien's armor had been stripped of its energy field, its surface scarred from battle. Without his weapon, without his soldiers, he looked smaller. Reynolds approached, stopping just short of the perimeter of guards. You've been silent since you surrendered. The Zenari lifted his head. The glow from his visor had dimmed. There is little to say. Reynolds folded his arms. You miscalculated. You thought energy shields would make you untouchable. You thought kinetic force was obsolete. He leaned in slightly. You were wrong. A flicker of something passed through the Zenari's posture. I was. The admission was quiet, but it carried weight. Reynolds nodded. Then tell me something. If we had lost, if we had surrendered, what would have happened to us? The commander hesitated. Integration. Meaning. The alien's hands clenched at his sides. Your people would be absorbed into the Dominion. Your technology dismantled, your culture repurposed. You would serve. His voice lowered. Those who resisted would be eliminated. Reynolds studied him for a long moment. You really believed you were doing us a favor, didn't you? The Zenari did not respond, but his silence spoke volumes. Reynolds sighed. Well, you're in a new reality now. You're not dealing with species who lay down and accept defeat just because someone bigger tells them to. He gestured toward the screen displaying the Zenari warship. They're still up there, waiting for your orders. What happens next? For the first time, hesitation rippled across the alien's frame. Reynolds stepped closer. If they attack again, we'll fight again. And we'll win again. His voice dropped into something firm, something unshakable. But you know what'll happen if we keep winning? Your Dominion will see you as a failure. You'll be discarded. Replaced. The Zenari's visor flickered. A long silence stretched between them. Then, at last, he spoke. You are correct. Reynolds arched an eyebrow. The commander straightened, his armor shifting as he inhaled deeply. I will send a message to my ship. Aldrich took a step forward. A message saying what, exactly? The Zenari's gaze did not waver. That humanity is not to be underestimated. Reynolds and Aldrich exchanged a glance. Then, with a slow nod, Aldrich motioned for the comms officer. A secure channel was opened, and the Zenari commander stepped forward. His voice was steady as he spoke in his native tongue, broadcasting directly to the warship above. The words were indecipherable to human ears, but the effect was immediate. Within seconds, the Zenari vessel, once dormant, began to move. On the command deck, all eyes locked onto the satellite feed. The warship adjusted its trajectory, pivoting away from Earth's orbit. Then, with a ripple of blue energy, it vanished into the void. A breath of silence. Then, the room erupted into movement. Officers relayed confirmations. Radar stations reported clear skies. The Zenari were gone. Reynolds exhaled slowly. Aldrich let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. Well, I'll be damned. Reynolds turned back to the Zenari commander. So, what now? You're still our prisoner. The alien tilted his head slightly. Am I? Reynolds frowned. The Zenari took a step forward, his posture shifting, not as a soldier, not as a prisoner, but as something else. Your people have changed the course of this war. The Dominion will not forget this humiliation. But you have earned something rare. He paused. Respect. Aldrich scoffed. Respect doesn't mean peace. No, the Zenari admitted. But it means possibility. Reynolds studied him, then nodded. Then let's see where that possibility takes us.